webinar called Make Your Campaign Count, How to Communicate Effectively. This webinar is for all state, tribal, and campus Garrett Lee Smith grantees. We had over 70 participants registered, and we know some of your sites have multiple people, so we're really excited about the enthusiasm around the topic and glad that you're joining us today. I am Sheila Krishnan. I'm a campus prevention specialist on the prevention support team at SPRC. I have a background in public health with specific interests in health communications, social marketing, and working with the media. And I'm joined today by Ellie Stout, and I'll have Ellie go ahead and introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Sheila, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're joining from western parts. I'm Ellie Stout, and I lead the prevention support team here at the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. And my master's degree is actually in health communication, and I've worked for a number of years in social marketing and health communication for various audiences and settings, as well as for the past 5.5 years working in suicide prevention communication and safe messaging with Garrett Lee Smith grantees and national partners. So I'm really excited to be here with you all today and learn a bit more about some of the communication efforts you are planning.
Great, thanks, Ellie. And I'll just quickly go over some of the tech tips for the webinar today. If you do have any issues with logging on to Adobe Connect or with the audio, feel free to call SPRC at the 617-618-2380 number listed on the slide. The audio information is displayed at the lower left-hand side in case you should need it. You are able to listen to this presentation over your computer speakers as well. You can also contact Adobe Connect directly at the 1-800 number listed. Your phone lines have been muted for today's webinar, but please feel free to use the chat box for any other questions or issues that come up, and we will be asking you to participate through the chat box throughout today's webinar. If you need to view the presentation larger, you can click on the full screen button at the upper right-hand side to enlarge your view. To resume the normal size, just click the button once again. I should also mention that we will be recording today's webinar, and it will be available on the grantee section of the SPRC website afterwards. I want to start by giving a quick overview of what we'll be covering in today's webinar. We'll begin by talking about why strategically planning your communications initiatives is important and how it can help to make them more effective. We'll go over what communications can do to help you achieve your intended outcomes and also what some of its limitations are. We'll be introducing you to an 8-step strategic communications model, and we'll be focusing on 2 of the steps in depth today that involve developing clear communications objectives and identifying and segmenting your target audiences. We know a lot of you have questions about social media and also how to evaluate your communications campaigns. While we aren't going to get into the specifics of evaluation or developing a social media strategy, creating clear communications objectives and understanding your audiences is an essential component for both of these aspects, whether it's deciding if you want to use social media or figuring out if you've achieved what you set out to do. We'll make sure you know how to find the strategic communications planning section on the SPRC website, and we do have more resources there on social media specifically. So these are a few of the frequently asked questions related to communications that we hear from many of you, and maybe similar to what others of you are planning on doing with your grants. These are all really great activities and ideas to be engaging in, but we want to make sure that you're enhancing your reach by applying some of the concepts of strategic communications planning that we know can help. Developing clear communications objectives and going through the process outlined in the 8-step model will help you to answer some of these questions. Considering what type of speaker to bring in or creating posters to distribute require thinking through who your audience is, where you can reach them, and what behavior you would like them to adopt or change. So finally, here's the 8-step model that I've been referring to. This model lays out a process for you to follow as you plan your communications initiatives. It's based upon the theory and practice of social marketing, which adopts techniques that were developed through commercial marketing efforts, but is focused on encouraging positive behavior change as opposed to maximizing profits. You may see other models that follow a similar process of planning, implementation, and evaluation, but with fewer steps or steps combined. It's important to remember that these models are just frameworks for you to use, and the core concepts outlined are what you should focus on. As I mentioned before, we'll only be talking in depth about the second and third steps in today's webinar and working with the assumption that assessing your current situation has already taken place. The following steps that include developing and pre-testing your messages and materials, selecting your channels, activities, or other outputs, developing an action plan, and evaluating in order to make modifications are expanded upon in the strategic communications section that was developed and toolkit that was developed for grantees specifically by Gallup. I'm curious to know how many of you have actually seen this model before. So if you have seen it, could you go ahead and use the icon at the top of the screen to raise your hand? There's a little person with their hand raised, and you can click on that. Okay, so I see at least a handful of people are familiar with this or have seen this model before. Okay, and some people have maybe seen a similar one, but not the exact one. Great, thanks. Well, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Ellie now, who's going to talk more about communications.
Great. Thanks, Sheila. And so before we dive into the content that Sheila just outlined, I wanted to start with the point that communication campaigns, while I love them and they can do a lot, unfortunately can't do everything. So things like changes in services or technology, regulations, or policy are also often necessary to make changes in order to prevent suicide. And while communication can do a lot of things like increasing awareness or knowledge of a health problem or solution, changing beliefs or attitudes, and most importantly, prompting action or modeling particular skills, there are also things that communication just can't accomplish on its own. Things like producing sustained behavior change for complex health behaviors without other larger environmental change. Communication cannot compensate for inadequate services or services that are inaccessible to your audience. And so communications is just one tool in your toolbox, and I'm using this very eloquent clip art to demonstrate that you definitely don't want to use it for things that could be better accomplished through other elements of your program. So just making sure that they're the right tool for the problem at hand. And at the same time, communication can never really stand alone. And what I have here is a logic model, and I know some folks are less familiar with logic models. This may look very complex, but in fact, it's just walking us through how, in this particular example, establishing a hotline would contribute to suicide prevention. You could also establish a similar logic model for promoting counseling center services or perhaps gatekeeper training. So this is really a program that might be implemented as part of a Garrett Lee Smith grant. So in this case, this program is establishing a hotline. They assume that having a hotline will mean people will call. And folks who call will receive increased perceived support and appropriate referrals, which in turn will increase service utilization. And those things will influence both risk and protective factors by reducing depression and isolation, we hope, and increasing a sense of support and effective care for those who need it. And that finally leads us to our outcome, which is reducing suicidal behavior. Now, how would communication come in to support this overall program? Well, if a media campaign were implemented to promote the hotline, we could reasonably assume that exposure to messages promoting the hotline would increase. And hopefully, if it's a well-designed communication campaign, the messages would increase the motivation to call the hotline. So communication in this example is contributing to a key assumption in our overall logic model and helping to increase calls to the hotline so that all the other pieces can fall into place. So as you develop your communications campaigns, it's important to be clear how your own communication efforts are tying in with and contributing to your overall program. So here's an example of a communication campaign from several years ago now from AFSP. And I wanted to ask you to take a brief look at this and then type into the chat box your ideas for other elements that might be needed for this campaign to be successful. So what other program components would need to be in place? There are a few elements to the poster. Phone number. Sure. You guys are so great. You're all on safe messaging and you're like, there's no phone number and that's a problem. But yes, here we go. So physician training. The message here is see your doctor. Well, the doctor needs to be prepared if we're recommending that the person speak to their doctor. There's perhaps a screening tool for the doctor to use if they're going to their primary care physician. Absolutely. No problem with the typos, Will. I got what you were talking about. Anything else that might be important to build in? Capability to treat or increase in care? Absolutely. So perhaps a referral network in place if people are going to their primary care physician to be sure if someone's in crisis. A referral list, exactly. Oh, and sliding scale services, perfect. Maybe people don't have insurance. Great. And I also noticed there's a website, so the content in that website might also be important to tailor so people can find a doctor perhaps. And people are pointing to the 1-800 number, which absolutely, this is an older example, and I agree that a website is probably not adequate. So this campaign itself might be improved, but this is just one sort of billboard from that campaign. But I think you guys did a great job of pointing out how this campaign needs to have other elements in place in order for that action of see your doctor to be an effective measure to prevent suicide. So hopefully you'll be doing the same kind of thinking for your own communications efforts. So once you've decided how communication can support your overall program, then it's time to really narrow down your communication objectives. So you know how it connects to the broader effort. Now it's time to think about what you want the audience to do after they see your campaign or hear it or witness the messages. And I do have here in parentheses, obviously there might be other elements. You might want the audience to know or think or feel something after being exposed to your campaign, but it's really important to accompany that with a call to action. Awareness alone is usually not enough for people to change behaviors. So once we've informed audiences and captured their attention, we need to tell them exactly what they can do differently to change. And of course, again, you want to be sure how that change will then contribute to your overall program goals. So here's an example. In this scenario, a campus has found through survey data that LGBT students on their campus are less likely than other students to seek counseling center services when they are depressed or in crisis. So based on this information, one of the overall program goals is to increase the number of LGBT students seeking help at the counseling center, either directly or through referrals by others on campus. So that's the program goal, the overall idea. But I'd like to ask you all to, again, use the chat box to think through how communications might contribute to that goal. And of course, there might be things that communication can't address. And we're also guessing why LGBT students are not seeking help at the counseling center. But I'm asking you to kind of make some educated guesses about what communication could do to help encourage those students to seek help. I see some folks are typing. Open communication can help reduce stigma. Okay, so a lot of people talking about stigma, making people feel safe in seeking help, LGBTQ visibility at the counseling center. Great, so elements, gatekeeper training. So communication could promote your gatekeeper training so that people can get referred. Awareness of resources. People might not know about the counseling center and what services are available. Targeting LGBT groups with communication efforts, that's great. And contact information, and having counseling services at the LGBTQ centers. Now, some of the ideas, these are all really great ideas, are maybe, for instance, having services available at the centers or doing gatekeeper training are not necessarily directly about communications, but we have some ideas in here as well, making sure people know that services are confidential, and some of the other ones I just read, making sure people know it's a safe space that communication could influence. So I brainstormed a little myself and came up with a few ideas, and I think all of these have been covered in some way. And as I'm going through this, I'm realizing my example is actually a hypothetical example, but the example I have here, this poster, is from the University of West Florida, which is a grantee. So I pulled it up as an example of how some of the issues that we just raised in the chat could be addressed. So in this case, this example from the University of West Florida is focusing on perhaps increasing knowledge of the counseling center, but for me it more looks like conveying that it's LGBT friendly. So a lot of people commented on safe spaces and cultural competence of the counseling center. What I really wanted to point out here, as I mentioned before, we really want to give people an action. So here, they're asking students to call a specific number and make an appointment. It's very specific action. And without that information, it's true this campaign might change perceptions among LGBT students about the counseling center, but it would leave them on their own to figure out how to reach out and seek help. So, this does have an aspect of influencing attitudes and perceptions, perhaps even knowledge that the counseling center is there, but the call to action is also equally important. Once we've motivated them, they need to know what to do. So that's the behavior that poster was aiming for, but I was curious once again to ask you all, in your own communication efforts, I know that many of you are currently planning or implementing communication campaigns. What are some of the behaviors or the actions that you're trying to promote with those efforts? And we've changed the setup a little bit, but your chat box is still there in the center, so I'm curious what people have to share. Become a self-advocate. Reduce underage drinking via social norms campaign. So could you, as you're typing in, okay, help seeking. So help seeking might be the closest to what I'm actually asking you. So the other ones are kind of like goals, which are great, but what are you telling people to do? So you're telling them to call the counseling center or go to the counseling center. What else do you want people to do? Maybe you're targeting other groups, not just those directly at risk. Understanding signs of depression or suicide. Okay, call a national hotline, ask the question. Oh, these are great. Become a gatekeeper. Great point. You can promote gatekeeper trainings through communications. Take QPR, call a hotline to report abuse, talk about suicide, means restriction. That's great. And as people type in more answers and everyone can read, these are some great behaviors. I think it's important to keep in mind sort of the world that your target audience lives in, and Sheila's going to get into that a bit more. But I think all of us are very motivated by awareness of the problem. We know suicide is a preventable public health problem, and that's why we're in this business. But I think from from the perspective of a student or a faculty member or a parent or a community member, it's really helpful to give people solutions that are accessible to them. So the more specific we can be, like call a hotline or come to our training, or ask the question and here's the question to ask. Seek help through texting. That's a great example. But here's the number. I think the more accessible we can make those solutions, the more empowered people feel like that they can make a difference. So you guys are already well on the right track. But I hope that through some of these examples, you can see that how important the action is in addition to the knowledge and awareness. So thanks so much for sharing some of your program efforts. All right. So Sheila mentioned that on our website we have in the grantee area, and we'll give you the link at the end of the presentation, we have a communications page for grantees, and that features a strategic communication planning workbook that SAMHSA had developed, and it's a wonderful resource, and we have a few other resources listed there as well. But this is really where we'd like you to start. And I wanted to point to the workbooks portion where there's a worksheet that helps you think through your communication goals and objectives. And it also helps you think through prioritizing them as you plan your communication efforts. So this is a picture of that. And there's also some text that walks you through thinking about your communication objectives and focusing on the change or action you really want to promote. So I just wanted to highlight that. But also I wanted to pause and see what people think so far. I know you all are at different points in developing campaigns, or I see we have a few fairly experienced grantees on and some new grantees. So are there any questions about some of the content we've covered so far, or other experiences or examples that you'd like to share? And if you have any, because of the number of people, we're not unmuting lines. So if you want to type it into the chat, just as you have been doing. So I'll give folks a moment to think about that and type in any questions or additional thoughts or comments or examples. I'm going to wait the uncomfortable minute just in case someone is thinking about, aha, see, someone's typing. Nope. All right. Well, we do have some time for questions at the end as well. And if you do have a question that pops into your mind, you can type it in the chat as we go, and we'll definitely pause and address it when it makes sense. But with that, I think I'll turn it over to Sheila and get into audiences a bit.
Great. Thanks, Ellie. So I'm going to start by talking about knowing your audience. And to begin with, identifying your target audience is as simple as knowing who it is that you want to make your intended behavior change. So we've talked a little bit about what behavior changes you're aiming for, and now we're going to talk about who you want to make those changes. So identifying a target audience could be considered identifying your primary target audience. So who is it that you want to make the behavior change? You'll already have a sense of who this is based upon your initial information gathering that you did when you were assessing the situation, getting a sense of the problem in the specific setting that you work in. You may have more than one primary target audience, but they should be clearly defined as distinct groups. For example, if you want to focus on getting more LGBT youth who are at risk into services, you may also be interested in promoting social networks for student veterans. So while they're both target audiences, what you know about their benefits and barriers towards engaging in a specific behavior and how you reach them may look really different. Your secondary target audience is the people who can help the primary audience make the behavior change. So for example, a lot of you do gatekeeper training, and gatekeepers are often people who we would think of as having some kind of influence over the target audience. So you choose people to train who may be likely to come into contact with young people at risk. So some of these people may be parents or teachers, mental health providers, and I think peers are often a really common one who is thought of as a secondary target group. So I'm wondering, to go back to some of the behaviors that you mentioned, a few people talked about calling a hotline or attending a gatekeeper training. So thinking about who is it that you would want to call the hotline? And maybe this can be specific to the site that you work in or the setting that you work in. And go ahead and feel free to use the chat box. Okay, so students considering suicide. And we'll talk a little bit more about students as our general audience. People at risk. So is there anyone that can be a little bit more specific in who exactly is it that you're trying to reach? Who might you consider at risk? Okay, great, Almarosa. LGBTQ and the intersection of being LGBTQ and Native American. Student athletes, veterans and military. Students in grades 7 through 12 in northeastern Minnesota. Undergraduates, college students. I see a couple more people are typing in. Commuter students. American Indian and Alaska Native youth, ages 10 to 24. Okay. Female military, great. Okay, so I'm going to get into talking about why would you divide your general audience into subgroups. We often segment our target population along demographic or geographic distinctions, but it's important to identify what differences are the most important in the context of the program. Sometimes thinking about people who are engaging in your intended behavior versus those who are not can help to identify some of the underlying values, attitudes, and beliefs that are playing a part in behavior change. One of the problems with focusing on an overall broad general audience is that not everyone who you're reaching may need the specific intervention that you're promoting. Other entities may already be reaching parts of this audience. Specific subgroups might have a lower incidence of the problem, or they may have already embraced the behavior that you're promoting. Some groups are more likely to change their behavior than others, and an initiative that targets a general audience is too broad to be able to address the benefits and barriers that affect whether or not they will achieve the intended behavior change. So what do we know and what else is important to know? A lot of you already have access to demographic or survey data that will tell you about your population. You or the key partners that you work with may intimately understand the dynamics of the particular setting that you're focusing on. And gathering information about your audience doesn't have to mean an extensive formative research process that might require more resources than you have to put towards this. But approaching how you think about your audience may require first exploring what some of the benefits or barriers through more informal processes like key informants or focus groups or other anecdotal information. The more that you can know about the current knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, as well as the media habits or lifestyles and leisure activities, and the better understanding that you have of your particular audience subgroup can help you target your initiative and tailor your materials and messages. So I want to talk a little bit about connecting to core values in terms of behavior change. These are a few of the main theories that we rely upon to give us insight into individual health behavior decisions, and they can help us get a better sense of the role that deeply held beliefs or values play when asking someone to change their behavior. We know that behavior change is often a complex set of mechanisms that influence our decision-making process and whether or not we engage in the behavior. So I think this is kind of fun to think about, actually, and I think even thinking about health behaviors that you have in your own life and what some benefits or barriers that influence whether you choose to do them or not is interesting to think about. So the trans-theoretical model, or referred to as the stages of change, can help us think about which stage our target audience is in terms of adopting a behavior. So some people may not know that a certain behavior is a problem, and some people may already have kind of put some actions into play to work towards improving that behavior. Social cognitive theory helps us appreciate the dynamic interaction between the environment, the behavior, and how the individual interacts, and is more focused on maybe how the community or the environment influences our decisions. So often core values include things like autonomy or independence or control, or what you might think of as self-efficacy in terms of motivating someone's behavior. And I think asking yourself questions like, what is it that my audience cares about? How do they see themselves? Can help get you to some of the deeper motivating factors. And using these theories can help you to decide which questions you want to ask your audience. So the one theory I will talk about a little bit further is the health belief model. And what we refer to often as self-efficacy can be broken down into perceived susceptibility to a problem, perceived severity of that problem, perceived benefits of a specific action, and perceived barriers to taking that action. So people who may fall into similar demographic groups may fall along different lines when divided by how susceptible they think they are to a problem or its severity, or how effective they feel the recommended course of action is. When you think about segmenting your audience, or when you're trying to understand why a specific strategy that you're promoting isn't getting the results that you want, coming back to some of these questions can help guide your plan of action. So I wanted to share one example from a former campus grantee at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. UW-Oshkosh administered an online survey to their campus to better understand the perceptions that students had of various health, safety, and wellness issues on campus. So this was a comprehensive survey that not only asked students to rank which issues they saw as being the most important to campus, but also questions about where students got their information. So was it friends? Was it health professionals, family, social media? Students were also asked about intervening in specific problem situations, like someone who drank too much or witnessing racist or homophobic language, and whether they thought intervening would make a difference and what some of the barriers to intervening were. As you can see, some of those questions relate back to self-efficacy and exploring how effective they thought intervening could be and what was preventing them from stepping in. And a lot of what people said that was preventing them was safety. And so a few other interesting items that were included in the survey are on our slide. So the survey asked students about attending campus events. And so if this was your campus and you found out this information, it's a 32% of students said they rarely or never attend campus events. And female students were much more likely to attend campus events than male students. And so I'm curious about, if you were to administer a survey like this and found out this information that males were a lot less likely to attend campus events, what other places do you think, or where else do you think you could reach the male students on your campus? Dining halls, bathrooms, sports center, sporting events, the bathrooms again, athletic events, fitness center, great. Male residence halls, locker rooms, men's peer support groups, fraternity houses, bars, school newspaper, parking lots, yep. These are really great, and I think, when we go back to thinking about how we define our primary target audience, if we wanted to just say male students, I think this gives some more rich information. So male students who work out in the campus fitness center. And that helps to give you a more specific picture of who you're trying to reach with your campaign. University communications, great, male sports teams. So a few of the other interesting items that UW-Oshkosh found in their survey was that African American students, Asian American students, and Hispanic and Latino students ranked racist language as the most important issue on campus, as opposed to American Indian and Caucasian students who ranked excessive drinking as the issue that they saw was the most important on campus. So I think this gave them some insightful information into what some of the different perceptions of campus life and the campus climate were. And so these survey results were used to inform the development of their You Matter campaign that included 6 components related to campus wellness. As you can see on the slide, the 6 components are broken out into action matters, BAC matters, consent matters, listening matters, language matters, and safety matters. And each of these sections are a component of their overall programmatic strategy. So you can go to their website and explore these sections a little bit more. But if you click on each of the sections, you'll get further information about resources. A few sections have videos, and there's contact information if you have specific trainings that people can host, and they can figure out how to host that. So this was a way for them to address a lot of what they saw or a lot of what they heard from students as competing problem areas on campus. Okay, and I see that Willa added also, and who feels most targeted? Okay. So I want us to spend a little more time thinking about our target audience and how we segment a larger general audience into subgroups. And we'll do that by using the example of focusing on students. So I think a lot of you said that students in a broad way are who you're trying to reach. And so I know that a lot of you are working in different settings, so you might be reaching students who are in kindergarten through 12, middle school, high school. You might be reaching college students, more specifically medical students or student veterans, and they may be from a variety of demographic backgrounds and geographic locations. So I think we can already get a sense of the diversity of experiences and other values and beliefs that might exist in a general audience like students. So let's focus on our student veteran here and see how we can think more about a general target audience of student veterans. So we have our male student veteran here and on the left, and on our female student veteran who is also a mom. And so I want us to think about, go to our first question. So you can go ahead and use the chat box. And so we'll think about these two different sort of archetypes of different subgroups of our target audience. So let's say that we want to promote social networks among student veterans on a college campus. We want to create opportunities for them to be more connected to each other and to socialize with each other. And so what are some of the perceived barriers and benefits that a student veteran might have towards that particular initiative? Time, time management, great. We know that students are busy people, so attending another activity could definitely be a challenge. Identification, so not wanting to self-identify, and I think we know that that's often a challenge, and that people vary in whether they want to be seen as somebody who's a veteran or somebody who served in the military. Different priorities, family commitments, childcare issues, different ages, yep. So varying ages, if it comes from someone who isn't a veteran, they might not think it will be relatable. So who's trying to get them to connect, who's hosting the event. That's great, Mary Ellen. A benefit is the connectedness that they will get from that. Veterans are likely to be married. So if somebody is in a relationship and they might have competing priorities, they may not want to feel targeted. That's a really great point. I think there's a lot of initiatives out there targeting specific groups, and maybe people don't want to be a part of that. Sharing similar experiences, I think that is something that you hear a lot. Concerns about others understanding the military issues. Great. So I think we talked about some of the barriers and some of the benefits. And so thinking about these two, so let's say this is a male student and who's around 26 on a campus, and then we have a female student who also has a child to take care of. And so what are some of the differences? I think somebody mentioned childcare issues as one of them. So I see a couple people are typing in. So different life experiences. So maybe their experience serving in the military was pretty different. Maybe they're struggling with PTSD or other mental health issues. Maybe an older student veteran is not as interested in making social connections on their college campus. Possibly a trauma history. Just seeking help or looking for connectedness might be considered a weakness for the men. Different in communication styles. It sounds like that's what expecting more direct language and interaction versus an academic approach might be getting towards. So some are just focused on getting finished with school, so differences in how they're motivated to seek out connection. Military ranks might be an issue. Great, I think these are all really great ideas, and I think it's also important to mention that when and where the event is held or what type of event it is might end up being a barrier. So maybe somebody who's married or somebody who has a child can't attend a weeknight event on campus. And so thinking about some of those other issues as well. And so in terms of finding more kind of the rich information about the differences and the perceived barriers and benefits, if you didn't know, how could you find out? Focus groups, online surveys, getting training from the Veterans Resource Center and understanding military experience. And I think there are a lot of resources out there now about becoming more familiar with military culture, research or the literature review, partnering with stakeholders that already work with student vets. That's great. I think that's important to take advantage of people who do have expertise or experience in this area and may have some insight into working with a student population that you're trying to reach. So I also want to highlight this worksheet that's in the Strategic Communication Planning Workbook, which you can find on our website. And this will help you map out a little bit about the different intended audiences that you're seeking to reach and the different subgroups, and also think through what is it that each of the audiences value, What information sources do they trust? Where can you reach them? What are the barriers to reaching them? And it gives you an opportunity to write down and think about the specifics of defining who your target audience and who each of the segments is that you're trying to reach. So I want to go back to some of the questions that we brought up at the beginning of the webinar. And these are often things that grantees are working on, using social media or using creating a mobile app. And I'm wondering, by talking about communications objectives and thinking about your audience, what are some of the ways that you might enhance an initiative? Any one of these, how would you perhaps, in thinking about an intended audience and you're thinking about a Facebook page, how might you enhance or how might you otherwise think about developing your Facebook page? So the address and the name of the Facebook page, including images of target audience or building visibility. And I think it's important to decide first when you're thinking about using social media or thinking about creating a Facebook page to know whether that's where your target audience is gathering information, or if is that where they're spending their time, is that where they're looking for that kind of information, and then how trustworthy do they think that information is. To create and distribute an app or QR for students to use to gain access. And I think that's important. That's another, okay. So if the message is targeted to students or youth, work with youth around the messaging. I think that's a really great idea. Kids don't like government sites. I think that's really important to incorporate your target audience into the initiatives that you're planning. So if they tell you that they're not going to go to a specific website that you're promoting, then perhaps a change in your strategy towards creating a messaging or creating a channel that they will access and that they do trust. So I think for a lot of these activities, they can be enhanced by thinking through where your target audience is, what behavior you hope that this activity will help them to change or adopt, and where you can find them. Where are they getting their information, and how trustworthy do they think that information is? And so a few of the takeaways that I just want to make sure that each of you have from today's webinar is making sure that you do take the time to plan will help ensure that your communications efforts are more effective. So I know that it can be exciting or may seem important to get to programming or developing materials right away, but I think the time that you put into planning them and thinking through what behaviors you're wanting to change by using them, what other program components do you need to have in place to be able to achieve that goal, and then who your audiences are will help you to make your efforts more effective. I think focusing on the action or the behavior change that you want to see is really important. So you might want to create a Facebook page, or you might want to use some other type of social media, but what will using that social media help you to achieve? How will people change their behavior if they come to your Facebook page or any other kind of social media activity? And I think it's important to try to go beyond the surface demographic information and understanding your target audience and just asking yourself, what is it that your audience cares about and what will motivate them and how they might be different from each other in terms of the benefits and barriers that they see. And so we have a bit of time for questions. So I want to make sure that we're able to answer any questions that you have from today's webinar. Please go ahead and use the chat box. I see that several people are typing in questions. So Becky, you're participating in a health fair and would love some ideas and activities that entice people to come to the table. So I think this is a great question to think about who your target audience is. So who is it um, that you're targeting and what behavior are you promoting? And I think a lot of these are great ideas. So thinking about using a web-based campaign or creating a mural. But I think thinking about who it is that you're targeting and what behavior you're hoping to change or affect through using this particular strategy or tactic.
Yeah, and this is Ellie. I think the grantee community, you guys are really excellent at really creative communication tactics, and it's been great to see some of your thoughts on who it is that you're trying to target and what behaviors you're trying to get them to adopt. But I think sometimes the mural sounds really cool to me, and it's really exciting to get wrapped up in the delivery. And I think it's always important to keep in mind who you're trying to reach and why you want them to come to the health fair. When they come to your table, what do they get? And what do you hope they'll do next? So I know the concepts we've talked about are kind of early in your process, but and they're not the sexier parts, but keeping those in mind can help you make sure that everything you're doing is really using your resources as effectively as possible. And so once we get to the delivery, there's some great ideas that are popping up, like murals and web-based campaigns. Vicki, you mentioned web-based campaigns that were successful. I'm wondering if you could give us a little more information as we get some other tactics popping up with peppermints and other promotional materials. What kind of web-based campaign are you thinking of? Oh, fortune cookies. Everyone's very creative. I guess it'd be interesting to know what the message is inside the fortune cookies. That's neat. So, so I guess the other point I wanted to make while Vicki's telling us a little bit more about her question, 2 points actually. One, we do have grantee private pages where you can see some examples of other campaigns from states and tribes and campuses who've been funded previously. And the other point I wanted to make is that the communication objectives you set at the very beginning can be really helpful in evaluating your campaign as well. So I know there had been some questions about evaluation when people registered. And at the end of your campaign, when you want to know, was it successful, that really means going back to your objectives. What were you trying to accomplish? So, so we have a lot of great tactics, but I do want to keep pointing people back to the message. And I'm sorry, Sheila, I know we need to move on, but one more point. Somebody's mentioning a poster competition. I did want to make sure that everyone is aware of the safe messaging guidelines, which are in that communication area of our website. We haven't really touched on them a lot today because the steps we're talking about today really are pre-messaging steps. But when you're doing a poster competition or a video competition, it's really important to share those safe messaging guidelines with the folks who'll be entering the contest to make sure that all of the submissions are safe, so you can really use the best one and you don't have to reject some because of safety considerations. So I'm going to turn it back to Sheila now. Sorry to go a little over, Sheila.
No problem. Okay, great. And so I want to make sure that all of you know where you can find some of the resources that we've been mentioning. The Strategic Communications Planning section on our website you can get to by clicking that link. And it's something that you can do right now. If you have a few minutes to spend after the webinar, you can just click on the link from that slide itself, and that will come up on your browser. And in that section, you'll find some more resources about social media specifically, since I know a lot of you have questions about that. And you'll also find the safe messaging guidelines that Ellie just mentioned. And I also want to mention that your prevention specialist at SPRC is here to help you think through creating your communications objectives and thinking about your audiences, and helping you decide, which activities or which tactics might be the most useful based upon your audiences and objectives. So please feel free to use them, and all of their friendly faces are at the bottom of this slide. And so the next steps, I just want to mention that you will be receiving an evaluation by email within the next business day or so. And so we'd really appreciate it if you take the time to fill that out and give us some feedback on this webinar. And I also want to remind you again of the SBRC private pages, and you can find examples of other materials that grantees have created, but you can also post your examples to share with other grantees in this section, and that's a really great resource for everyone to use, and it is password protected, so you need to have a login and to be able to post and to be able to see the materials that are presented there. And this is just our contact information. If you have any questions or concerns, and you can contact Ellie or I or your prevention specialist. And so thanks to all of you for joining today, and thanks for your lively participation. It's always interesting to see what everybody's working on and getting a chance to connect with each of you. So thanks again for joining.